Hello, everyone. This is a relatively short PowerPoint presentation on the 2024 election. It's for you to watch, in the week before the election, and I hope that it helps you decide what you want to do. I hope you'll vote. What you do with your vote, of course, is entirely up to you, but I'm going to try to present a perspective on the election. There are also some readings in the weekly folder that I think you'll find helpful. You should. You don't have to read all of them. Some of them are the details on the Trump criminal cases are all optional. You can read that if you want. But the required material has been labeled so you'll know what I want you to see. Now, you may have heard people say that this is the most important election in recent memory, and I agree with the people who say that. I think this is the most important election that we have had in my lifetime. And it it's not just that it's a normal election. I mean, all presidential election years are important. There are certain things that are always at stake, and that they're at stake this time for all three branches of government and both state and local and national governments. At the national level, we have the presidency for the next 4 years, and the presidency, as you know, is a very important and powerful office. The entire House of Representatives, all 435 of them for the next 2 years, and 35 Senate seats. 33 are the regular class who would normally be elected. We elect, as you know, 1/3 of the Senate every 2 years, and the senators serve 6-year terms, so 1/3 of them run every 2 years. But there are also two special elections for people who will serve only a short term until a regular election is held for their seat because it was vacated. And remember, I mean, you're also deciding when you vote for president who gets to be a federal judge. I mean, all of the federal judges are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And then there are thousands of executive branch personnel who are appointed by the president. So that's always on the ballot. And also at the state level, we have 13 governor races. We have state legislative races all over the country, very important. And also all kinds of state and local ballot measures where people are voting either in an advisory capacity or to actually change the law, depending on the state, where the people are voting directly on things like here in Illinois, we'll be voting on an advisory referendum on a sort of millionaire's tax. I'm not going to really get into that, but just understand there's a lot always on the ballot, and there is this time. But this election is special because, as people have been pointing out, and I agree with them, the differences between the two presidential candidates and the parties they represent and the people who are voting for these two parties and these two candidates, those differences are absolutely enormous. And what I probably don't have patience with, I don't, you can vote for whoever you want, and I will respect your opinion on that. But when people say that they don't think this election is important or they don't think it will make a difference in their lives, I have no patience with that. I'll be honest with you. I mean, that is a ridiculous thing to say. It's always ridiculous. It's especially ridiculous this time. The results of this election will affect your life, the lives of the people you care about for a very long time to come. The country will either stay on more or less its current path if Harris wins, or if Trump wins, it will go in a radically different direction. And that will affect all of us. UIC, Chicago, your family, the economy, and many, many other things, the rights of women and other people. All these things are on the ballot for real this time. So the people who say this is an especially important election are absolutely right, in my opinion. Now, one mark of this is that many people have been pointing out that there could be political violence regardless of who wins, and you could argue this has already happened. I think, as you know, there were attempts on President Trump's life, former President Trump's life. There were attempts on his life. That's already happened. On January 6, 2021, at Trump's instigation, thousands of people invaded the U.S. Capitol building and tried to stop certification of the election of Joe Biden. So when people talk about political violence, they aren't fooling. There are many concerns, many different types of violence that can take place, but the fact that this is happening is sort of evidence of the stakes of the election. Many people understand that this is a very, very important election. So you know who the candidates are, but let's talk about them briefly. The Democratic Party presidential candidate is Kamala Harris, who received the nomination from the Democratic Party. Everyone thought it was going to be Joe Biden, but he withdrew after concerns about his horrendous debate performance in the debate against Donald Trump, and the fear that he was really too old to be doing this. He's, I think, 81. And so he withdrew, and Harris received the nomination at the Democratic National Convention, which was right here in Chicago. She's running against, of course, Donald Trump, who is now running the third time in a row as the Republican Party presidential candidate. This is highly, highly unusual for the same candidate to run even twice in a row, let alone three times. And so I just want to touch base with you briefly. I'm not going to try to predict the outcome here. You have an article in your folder that I think by Brian Klaas that does an excellent job of analyzing the coverage and the polling and everything. And if you want to know where things stand, I'd say that's why I put that there, so you can read that. And I do want, that is required, and I do want you to read that. It's not very long, but it's very good. On the left, you see the map of what happened in 2016 when Trump won, and on the right, you see the map of the 2020 election outcome when he lost. And what's interesting, if you take a look at this, is you can see that there's a lot of similarity here. You can see that the West and the Northeast are overwhelmingly Democratic. That's blue. You can see that the South and the Midwestern states are predominantly Republican. But let me call your attention to a few states in particular. There's some states that Trump won, which you can see on the left. Look at Arizona, which is right next to California, on the toward the bottom left part of the map. That's red on the left, and it's blue on the right, because Biden won that state. And go over to Georgia, way over on the East Coast, just above Florida there, you can see it was red. Trump won it in 2016, and Biden won Georgia in 2020. Now look at the top of the map up around where we are, up in the Great Lakes. You'll see Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. All of them on the left are all red. Look on the right, they're all blue. See? This is the so-called blue wall. Those New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan are sort of viewed as, and Minnesota are sort of viewed as a blue wall. In fact, really all the way across the northeastern part of the country, they sometimes call that the blue wall. Ohio used to be in there, but Ohio has gone for the Republicans multiple times in recent years, as it did the last two times for sure. So, but Trump won some of those blue wall states in 2016, and he lost them all in those three big ones in 2020. So, which leads you to wonder, okay, so what does that say about where we are now? This is a map from a outfit called 270 to Win. You can go to their website and see how they do this. They're trying to figure out, project based on polling where things stand today. And if you look at it, it's very interesting because those states I just showed you, and also add in North Carolina and Nevada, are all question marks in their view. They're not sure about which way they're going to go. They put the Democrats as having basically 226 votes that they need. It needs 270 to win. They have basically 226 to 219, but as you can see, plenty of votes to be decided in the swing states. Somebody's going to win most of those swing states. In my opinion, they could get divided very narrowly as they did in the year 2000 with Bush versus Gore, where the swing states were very much evenly divided. Or they could, and this is what I think is more likely, most of them will probably go for one candidate or the other, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to split up. I think if Harris wins one of the big three at the top of the map there, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, I think if she wins one, she'll probably win all of them. But we'll see how this goes. That's speculation on my part. But so that's where things stand. It's a closely balanced race according to the polling, but it may not turn out to be closely balanced in the results. And if you read the Klaas article, you'll see why he says that. Well, let's look at what the candidates say about each other. Trump says that Kamala Harris is stupid. He said that repeatedly. He says she's a communist. and he says she is a horrible person. He says that the United States has become, quote, a garbage can. He says that the United States has become a garbage can under Biden and Harris, and he says that immigration is destroying the country. He claims the economy is horrible and nobody respects the government. Harris says that Trump is a convicted felon, which is absolutely true. He is a convicted felon. That he is a fascist, which I'm going to talk about later in this presentation, and that he is suffering from age-related mental deterioration, which is what everyone was concerned about with Biden. And I'm going to leave it to you, but you can find all sorts of stuff on the examples of this. But she's pointing to things that have happened in Trump's talks recently publicly, where he has really sounded sometimes confused. He spent 39 minutes dancing at a town hall, just sort of rocking back and forth instead of taking questions, and really some very strange behavior. So her interpretation is that he's suffering from age-related mental deterioration, but I am not qualified to make a determination like that. I'll leave it to you, but she is saying that. And she also says he's a fascist, as others have said, including people who work for him. And she says, do you want to elect a convicted criminal who has been given immunity by the Supreme Court? This is based on a recent decision, Trump versus U.S., in which the Supreme Court ruled that presidents, and they were speaking specifically of Trump, has immunity for a lot of the things that they do when they're in office, immunity against criminal prosecution. Basically, if the actions that they are charged with crimes for doing are related to their official duties, the Supreme Court says they're immune. They invented this doctrine that is nowhere in the Constitution. The Supreme Court, the 6-person right-wing majority on the Supreme Court, invented this doctrine by themselves. It was a 6-3 decision. And she said, do you want a convicted criminal in the court who will have immunity for what he does, in the presidency, who will have immunity for what he does, and who will have the unreviewable power to pardon people who commit crimes to help him? And as you'll see, I have some examples of I'll read some examples of this later, but he did do that. He did pardon people who helped him the last time, and pardons cannot be reversed. She says that the economy is doing better than any other major nation, and doing vastly better than the economy was doing when Trump was president, and says that the U.S. is the leader of the free world. Now, you can look up the economic data on your own. The inflation rate is below 2.9%. The unemployment rate is around 4%. We have a steady economic growth rate, in positive growth rate. We're not in recession. It's hard to make the argument that we have a horrible economy. I don't know what that is based on, really, but you can look at the statistics for yourself. They're very easy to find. Harris's case on this is based on data, and I think Trump's is more based on a perception. He's talking to people in his base, voters, who feel that the economy has not served them, and they may have a real point about that. That many of the people who vote for him feel that they have been kind of left behind by public policy. And as you know, we've talked a bit about that our public policy apparatus is not very receptive to the demands of voters, and is much more receptive to the demands of large, powerful interests. So he is talking about that issue, and for many people, I'm not saying he would actually help people that way, because he didn't when he was president before. But he is talking about a real issue there in terms of the way our economy serves some people better than others. Kamala Harris was born in 1964. She's 60 years old, just turned 60 recently. Born in Oakland, California. Went to Howard University, a historically black institution, and received her JD at the University of California at Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco. She was elected DA, or district attorney, and city attorney in San Francisco. San Francisco is a city and a county. It is both. The same boundaries for the city and the county of San Francisco. And she was both the city attorney for the city of San Francisco and the district attorney for the county, the head prosecutor, the equivalent of our state's attorney. She was elected and re-elected as Attorney General of the state of California in 2010 and 2014. She was elected U.S. Senator from California in 2016 and elected Vice President of the U.S. in 2020 with Biden as president, after first running against him for the Democratic presidential nomination in that race. Her mother was a biologist by education and training who was from India. She was a pretty well-known researcher in the field of endocrinology and made some real contributions there. Her father was Donald Harris, who was Afro-Jamaican. He is of Africa, of course, of African ancestry, and but he's from Jamaica, and is now, I believe he's still alive, as professor emeritus of economics at Stanford University. I think he was the first, unless I'm mistaken, I believe he was the first black economics professor who got tenure at Stanford University. So she comes from a very educated family, and a family with some accomplishments. As Attorney General of California, some of her priorities included consumer protection. She was involved in a number of lawsuits against banks and other institutions. She was heavily involved in trying to protect people against foreclosure from banks during she was Attorney General starting in 2010. You may know that in 2008, the global economy and the housing market collapsed, and there were millions and millions of people foreclosed on. Well, during that time, after 2010, when she became Attorney General, she tried to protect people against predatory foreclosures. She has always been interested in criminal justice reform, although she is a career prosecutor and definitely tough on crime. But she also supported rehabilitation programs and other reform measures. As a senator, her priorities included gun control, the DREAM Act, which, as you probably know, involves providing for essentially a path to citizenship for people who were not born in this country, but who were brought here as small children by their parents and have lived their whole lives here. And we have many people, including UIC students and people around Chicago and elsewhere in the country, who would benefit from this. This would basically give them a path to citizenship that would honor the fact that they lived here their whole lives and came here because of their parents. She believes in the federal legalization of cannabis, of marijuana, and of course she believes in abortion rights. Interesting fact, as vice president, vice presidents serve as a tiebreaker in the Senate. They are a member of the Senate, the president of the Senate, so to speak. And if there's a tie in the Senate, the vice president casts a tie-breaking vote. Well, she has cast more tie-breaking votes in the U.S. Senate than any other vice president in American history. Donald Trump. Who is Donald Trump? He's 78 years old. He was born in Queens, New York City. He's currently a resident of Florida. He has a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Pennsylvania. Since 1971, he has been the owner and director, basically, the primary owner and director of a huge family real estate business called the Trump Organization. It was founded by his grandfather, and so he was essentially bequeathed control of this company by his father, who I'll talk about in just a minute. So he was born very, very wealthy into a very rich family. Developed real estate primarily in New York, initially mostly in Queens, but when Trump took it over, they did a tremendous amount of work in Manhattan. He never held public office before he won the 2016 presidential election over Hillary Clinton. He lost the popular vote in that election by 2.9 million votes. He got only 46% versus her 48% of the votes, but he won the Electoral College decisively, 304 to 227. I showed you the map earlier. The Electoral College system, as we have discussed, is an absurd relic that no other country uses, but as you can see, it's possible to win the popular vote by 2 percentage points, as Hillary Clinton did, and then lose the election by in an electoral vote wipeout. So it's a very strange system. Then in 2020, Trump lost the presidential election to Joe Biden, this time by 7 million votes. Again, he got about 46+% of the vote, but Biden got over 51. And then this time, Trump lost the Electoral College 232 to 306. So you see, very close. It's almost like the results flipped in a way in the Electoral College. And I showed you that map, and you can see that's kind of what happened with key states. Trump has consistently claimed that he was cheated, which is nonsense. It's a lie, and he's been saying it over and over. He lost over 60 lawsuits challenging the outcome. There were no substantial irregularities in the 2020 election at all. And he just keeps saying it. Sometimes he admits that he lost. Other times he goes back to saying that he won, but it's ridiculous. He was impeached by the House of Representatives twice, and both times he was not removed by the Senate. The first time he was impeached for essentially misusing his power as the president to try to get the president of Ukraine to conduct a bogus investigation of Joe Biden in Ukraine. I don't want to get into this, but this is a ridiculous claim that Joe Biden and his son were involved together in some sort of crimes in Ukraine. This is complete nonsense. The president of Ukraine did not do it, but Trump was impeached for misusing his power as president in that manner. Second time he was impeached because he instigated an insurrection on January 6, 2021, to try to overturn the results of the election, and that has been well established, and he is currently being criminally prosecuted for that, what he did. But he also presided over but in both cases the Senate did not remove him. It takes a 2/3 vote in the Senate, and it just wasn't there either time. He presided over the first stages in 2019 and 2020 of the U.S. response to the COVID pandemic, and a lot of the deficits that were created during his administration, budget deficits, were not they were primarily the result of COVID. So his administration in the last 2 years was heavily impacted by the COVID epidemic, as it was all around the world. And his main contribution there was to try to give a huge federal jumpstart to development of a vaccine. Vaccines were being developed all over the world, he was very quick to see that the answer to this was a vaccine and put a lot of resources behind it. Later on, he began to question the use of vaccines for some reasons that no one can really understand. But he was vaccinated. He had COVID and survived it, probably because he was, to some extent, receiving the best medical treatment, and which we should all receive, of course. But he survived COVID, and he presided over the first stages of the pandemic response. He is currently facing multiple criminal convictions and other charges, and I'm going to go over that with you. His mother was Mary Ann Trump, who was an immigrant from Scotland. So it's interesting that you have immigrant parents, at least one immigrant parent on both sides of this election. It's really unusual. His father, Fred Trump, was, as I said, a real estate developer in New York City who had in turn inherited the business. Fred Trump inherited the business, and then Donald Trump inherited it from Fred. Fred was a big-time real estate developer in New York City, mostly in Queens, building apartment buildings and other things. Donald Trump's net worth in 2024 was estimated at $2.3 billion. It is generally accepted that what Trump inherited was a business worth at that time something like $500 million. That's what he inherited. That's probably what it was worth at the time. It's difficult because this all depends on evaluating the value of determining the value of real property at a given point in time. But it's probably $500 million or more in wealth that he inherited in the form of this gigantic company. As president, and really still his issues were and are to ban the immigration of Muslims. He does not want people from Muslim nations coming into the United States. It was routinely called the Muslim ban. He wanted to build a wall along the Mexican border and have the Mexican government build it. He spent 4 years talking about this. Obviously, that did not happen. Sections of wall were built during his administration, as they were during Obama's, as they were during Bush's, but he never built a wall across the whole border, and Mexico has never paid a dime for a foot of it. He said over and over they were going to pay for it, and of course they never did. He is the leader of the Make America Great Again, or MAGA, social movement. He believes that climate change is a hoax instigated by China. He was a foreign policy isolationist who withdrew us from the Paris Climate Accords, withdrew us from the International Criminal Court, withdrew us from the Iran nuclear deal, which caused it to fall apart. It was designed to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons. He supports Putin, the dictator of Russia. He supports Russian interests, and he is a vehement critic of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which is viewed by most people as America's most important military alliance. He started a trade war with China over tariffs and promises to do the same thing again. Tariffs are basically federal taxes on imported goods, and they are paid by the consumer. So that you pay for them. If he's successful in putting tariffs on Chinese computers, you will pay more for your computer, because the company that imports it, Best Buy or whoever, has to pay the tariff, and they pass the tariff along to you. So when you hear Trump say that China's going to pay these tariffs, that's complete nonsense. It'll be paid by American consumers, as they were when he was president. And he also believes in tax cuts for the wealthy. He gave them some, and he promises to give them more. This is a list of some of his criminal cases, and also a couple of civil cases. Just to show you where things stand briefly, the top 4 are criminal. The bottom 2 are civil. So the Manhattan DA prosecuted him for falsified business records. He paid off 2 women he had sex with so that it wouldn't come out during the 2016 campaign. He paid them hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was convicted of all 34 counts and is due for sentencing on November 26 on those criminal charges. The next 2 are the cases brought by Federal Government, Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith. Special prosecutors are brought in as a protection for defendants like Trump, so that Merrick Garland, the democratically appointed Attorney General, has no control over these cases. They are run by a special prosecutor named Jack Smith. So the first one on stealing government documents was dismissed because he stole hundreds of thousands, or I don't know how many, enormous number of federal documents, including top secret documents, and squirreled them away at his estate in Florida. That case was dismissed by a trial court judge named Eileen Cannon, who was appointed by Trump. She says that the special prosecutor was not constitutionally appointed. It would have to be appointed by Biden and approved by the Senate. She's the only person who believes that. This is up on appeal, and it's almost certain that she's going to be reversed on this. She's the only judge I know who has ever made such a ruling in recent years. The other case involving Jack Smith is Trump's involvement in trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. This is in process in the trial courts right now. It was impacted by the Supreme Court's immunity case. Some of the charges were arguably related to his official duty, and so the Supreme Court says he can't be prosecuted for some of those things. Judge Chutkan, who's the trial court judge, is trying to sort through this right now. But that's still in the courts, still in the trial courts. Then we have a couple of another state case. The first one was I mentioned the New York State case, Manhattan DA. Fulton County, Georgia, there is another case against him for state RICO, racketeering, influence, corrupt organizations, it's called, for attempting to overturn the election results in the state of Florida in 2020. That case is in process in the trial court right now. And then we have a verdict in a civil case, a civil fraud trial that was brought by the Attorney General of the state of New York, where Donald Trump, a bunch of other individual defendants, and the Trump organization, includes his children, Donald Jr. and Eric, were all basically found liable and, in essence, guilty. This is a civil case of defrauding the state. They were defrauding banks, insurance companies in the state. They were required to pay more than $450 million in civil fines. They were banned from doing business in New York State for varying numbers of years, and their business was placed under the control of a monitor, the Trump organization. So basically civil fraud, and he lost that case. He can't do business in the state of New York now. Then we have the case of E. Jean Carroll, a woman who has said for years that he raped her in a changing room in Bergdorf Goodman many years ago. She said it in a book. He called her crazy. She sued him for battery, sexual abuse, and defamation, and she has won 2 verdicts against him, one for $5 million and the other for $83 million. And the trial judge found that what he did to her constitutes in conventional, normal terms, not just sexual abuse, but rape. He also has previous involvement with the law. In 1973, the Civil Rights, that was 2 years after he took over the Trump Organization. The Civil Rights Division sued the organization for racial discrimination against black and Puerto Rican applicants. They settled the case by a consent decree and promised to change their practices. In bankruptcy, he had filed 6 business bankruptcies from between 1991 and 2009. He bankrupted a whole bunch of his companies. He managed to go broke running casinos. And I'm not sure how that works. I've never heard of anyone going broke running casinos because it's immensely profitable, but he did. He borrowed so much money that they could not become profitable. And while he was doing that, he allowed money laundering in the casinos. In 2015, after years and years of being pursued by the federal government, he paid a $10 million civil penalty against the Trump Taj Mahal Casino Resort for willful and repeated violations of the Bank Secrecy Act for allowing money laundering in the casinos, much of which was being done by Russian mobsters. He had years of prior violations dating back to the 1990s. And then in 2018, he was involved in a fraudulent endeavor called Trump University, where he was selling real estate training, how to make millions in real estate. It was determined to be basically fraudulent operation, and he paid a $25 million settlement to the victims of that, who were the people who were dumb enough to pay for the course. So that's much of his legal history. Let's look at the party platforms. And I took this from the platforms, and they're in your folder for the week. You can look at all this in detail. This is just a summary. The Democratic Party platform says, grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. In other words, not from the top down. Reward work, not wealth. That's their slogan for taxing the wealthy. Do something about the climate crisis. Lower the cost of health care. Do something about guns to protect communities against gun violence. And then they have a whole series of reform measures, protecting voting rights, women's rights, promoting racial equity, and LGBTQ rights, and others. You can look at that and see. But voting rights are particularly important. They're trying to expand the federal government's role in protecting rights to vote all across the country, because it's easier in some states than others. Secure the border and reform the immigration system. They believe in comprehensive immigration reform, had a bill almost passed on that score in Congress just in the last year, and Republicans were going to vote for it, or at least enough were going to vote for it, and then Trump told them to vote against it because he wanted the issue to run on, and the Republicans did his bidding, and so the bill did not pass. They have a thing called the Unity Agenda, which is a number of different issues put together, doing something about the opioid epidemic and mental health and cancer, doing things for veterans. This part of it is, you can read about it, but it's a whole series of different measures that are designed to benefit different groups who are part of the Democratic coalition. And strengthen American leadership in foreign policy. Now the Republican platform is really kind of strange. This is it. This is the whole Republican platform, really. It's you can read this, but it's a series of slogans. Seal the border, stop the immigrant invasion, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history, end inflation. I mean, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far! Exclamation point. You can read this over, but it reads like a series of tweets, really, as opposed to like policy statements. You can read it, and I encourage you to take a look and see what they stand for. The Trump platform is a little different. It's really very similar, actually, but I say the Trump platform because if you go to his webpage, this is the text I took directly off the webpage. Secure our borders, reclaim national sovereignty as if we didn't have it. Declare war on drug cartels, and he wants to invade Mexico. Stop crime. Crime is going down. We've talked about this, but restore safety. Crime is going down and has been going down ever since the pandemic ended, or about a year after the pandemic ended. And then you see reject globalism and embrace patriotism. Well, he's talking the strength and leadership and all. These are the same kind of slogans that he was using in the 2016 and again in 2020. It's the same things. Care for our veterans. Both parties are on that. Protect parents' rights. Right there, this has a lot to do with transgender issues because they want to make it um, im- impossible for young people who are, say, below the age of 18 to do certain things, such as get abortions, have anything involving gender reassignment, all these matters. They want to block that. They want that to be all controlled by parents. And that's been an issue for some time, difference between Republicans and Democrats for some time. In censorship and reclaim free speech, I have no idea what that's about. Drain the swamp. You remember that from these two previous campaigns. Better healthcare options, choices at lower cost. Trump has been asked. Remember, he was president for 4 years. Said he was going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Did not do it. Tried to do it. Missed it by one vote. And has never had a proposal for what to replace it with. During the debate with Harris, he was asked what he would replace it with and if he had a plan, and he said, quote, "I have a concept of a plan." So he doesn't even, after all these years, he still does not know what he wants to replace the Affordable Care Act with, and it might be nothing. Nobody seems to know. Now, the other thing I'm calling your attention to is Project 2025, and I think you should just take a look at it. I link to it's up at the whole document, 900 pages. It's 900 pages long. It is a 900-page manual for reorganizing the federal government to put it under the control of the president. It is from the Heritage Foundation, which has done this for every presidential election since Reagan. They design a mandate, a set of policy proposals. And this is the one for Trump's second term, if he gets one. It would be a radical restructuring of the executive branch. When you hear Trump and say that he's not part of this is, of course, not true. Almost all the principal authors and organizers of the Project 2025 project were former Trump administration officials working in partnership with the Heritage Foundation. So you can see what it's about: ending abortion, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights. And the biggest thing, really, in a way, is the way it would reorganize the federal government. It would essentially abolish the independence of the civil service and place the executive branch of the federal government under direct presidential control, and removing its independence. So it would lead to a highly centralized executive branch with a great deal of power. People would be hired and fired based on their loyalty as opposed to their qualifications, and there's all kinds of right-wing social agenda stuff in it. You can take a look at it, but just understand, as I said, they gave Reagan it was called Mandate for Leadership in 1981. They've done it every Republican president since then has received one. Both Trump and Vance endorsed Project 2025, but when you hear Trump deny that he knows anything about it, again, just understand he knows exactly what this is. As president, he followed 2/3 of their previous recommendations for his 2016 term. How do I know that? It's right on the front page of the Heritage Foundation's documents. There it is. I did a screen cap for you. You can see it right there. It says that his mandate for leadership, that there were 334 unique policy recommendations that they made, and he implemented or tried to implement 64% of them when he was president the first time. So please, when he says he doesn't know what they're talking about, give me a break. Of course he knows. Now, the last thing I want to talk about on this is this question of fascism, which we now have. This is really remarkable. We have Kamala Harris and previous cabinet members of Trump's, like John Kelly, who was Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, running the White House for him. John Kelly says he's a fascist, that Trump is a fascist. Kamala Harris says he's a fascist. Well, what does all this mean? What does this talk mean? What is fascism? Well, fascism is a system of politics and government whereby you put one authoritarian leader, one person, in charge of a party. And the party, through the party, that authoritarian leader controls the government, all aspects of the government. Remember what I said about unifying the executive branch? The economy, they control the social institutions, they control the military, the press, schools, universities, all put under political control. Listen, to what Trump says and see if you can make your own decision as to whether he advocates that or not. They take power by force or elections, whichever you choose. Hitler tried to take power by force, ultimately used elections and force. They inspire a mass movement by telling them that they have grievances. They say you're being mistreated. There are powerful forces aligned against you in the society. The enemy within is out to get you. But they promise that if you put us in power, we will get you the wealth and power and prestige that you deserve. It's a far-right militaristic ideology. It always refers to the former greatness of the nation and restoring that greatness by force if necessary. So this Make America Great Again thing is, listen to what other fascists have said throughout history. This thing about restoring greatness of the past is a key theme. It is ultra-nationalist, based on the nation and the national government as the most important institution in the society. Grievances and conspiracy theories about the enemy within are used to mobilize mass support. Scapegoating of minority groups, including demonizing and punishing your political opponents, immigrants, and groups of other minority groups are often targets of oppression. The use of force against citizens to suppress dissent, and ultimately the enforcement of obedience. Some examples of people who did this were Hitler, Mussolini, Pinochet, Chile, Suharto in Indonesia, Franco in Spain, Orban in Hungary, arguably, maybe, and you can think about others. Why do people say that Trump is a fascist? Well, because of things he said. He has said he wants to use the military to punish the enemy within. He calls them a vermin and says that his political opponents are trying to bring the country down and so forth. He is at the head of a mass movement, this Make America Great Again movement that is premised on some of these same themes of grievance and past national glory. He does want to centralize power in himself. He does demonize his political opponents in every conceivable way. And he does use rhetoric that is reminiscent of fascists in history. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute, the big lie theory. And he does believe in taking power by force if the election doesn't work. He was the guy who, at a speech, who encouraged the mob to storm the Capitol. You can listen to him doing it on January 6th. And the last one I want to go over is this big lie thing, because I find this part of it very interesting, the analysis. Back in 1943, there was a man named Walter Langer. He was an intelligence analyst with the Office of Strategic Services. That's the OSS. World War II, it's 1943. This is the precursor agency to the Central Intelligence Agency. That was the OSS. He did an analysis of Hitler's personality that was published in 1943. You can still get that document. It's online. But then it came out as a book in 1972 called The Mind of Adolf Hitler. And here's what he said. Hitler's primary rules were never allow the public to cool off. In other words, never let people get their footing. Constantly command the news cycle. Constantly keep people off balance with a new issue, a new challenge, a new everything all the time. Never admit a fault or wrong. Never concede that there may be some good in your enemy. Never leave room for alternatives. It's me or nothing. Never accept blame. Concentrate on one enemy at a time and blame him for everything that goes wrong. And then comes the big lie. People will believe a big lie sooner than a little one. If you repeat it frequently enough, people will sooner or later believe it. So now that's where I'm going with this. Now I think that this is the final slide. I'd encourage you to take a look at these documents that are in your folder. Think this over, and if at all possible, if you are eligible to vote, if you can possibly get to the polls, vote. And please don't think for 1 minute that the outcome of this election doesn't matter to you, because it certainly does, and for many, many years to come. I'm trying to present facts. It's very difficult to do this in this climate, because we have a candidate who is denying things that are obvious, provable facts, and who is stating things that are demonstrably false. And we have another candidate, the Democratic candidate in this case, who fits, fairly well within the mainstream of most previous political candidates. I've told you before, the Republican Party really went off the rails and increasingly starting in the early 90s, to the point now where even legendary figures in the Republican Party, like the previous president George Bush, who was very popular, Ronald Reagan, people like that, would be denounced by the current Republican leaders because they are not, quote, conservative enough. And you can look at the quotations from Ronald Reagan and George Bush and the things they have said about politics, and you can see that the difference between the Republican Party of the 1980s and the Republican Party of today is just absolutely enormous. And so that really is the story of the election. We have a sort of mainstream Democratic candidate who has come up through the institutions of our society as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, as an attorney general, as an elected politician in the Senate, and as vice president, a rather conventional approach. And now we have the last three elections, a candidate who comes from outside the system completely, who has broken all the rules of politics and broken the law, or allegedly broken the law in both civil and criminal ways over and over and over, but who is at the head of a powerful mass movement that seems to be unaffected by anything that he says or does. And that's where we are. This is a very unusual place to be at for our society. And so we'll see how the election turns out. I really encourage you to read up on this. The Brian Klaas article, I think you'll find, will be quite excellent, and will answer a lot of your questions about polling, how the polling is different now than it has been in the past, and why the polling we're seeing constantly on television may not be accurate. Now, it might turn out to be accurate, but Klaas has detailed reasons why he thinks it may not be. So I think you'll find this very useful. And that's all I have for now, and thanks for your attention.